regardless of any time you have something that stresses an animal, right, you're going to get decreased performance and decreased productivity. Response to animal disease and biosecurity and all of those things. And really with an ectoparasite, what you're looking for is enhanced management practices. And so that includes, doing anything and everything we can to control or to disrupt that screwworm life cycle. We think about, if nothing else, the white-tailed deer population. So prior to screwworm eradication, there were, depending on who you ask, 150, 200,000 to 500,000 deer in the whole state of Texas. Now we've got 5.3 million.
Yeah.
Certainly can be a human health issue, a public health issue, but until it gets here and we see what happens, from our perspective at the animal health side, it's certainly of concern, but it's not something for people to be panicked about.
Welcome to the Landowner Insider, the podcast for Texas landowners who want to stay up to date with current events shaping our state. Here we talk about issues that actually impact your Texas lands, markets, water, wildlife, policy, and the decisions that are shaping our state. I'm your host, Casey Mock with the Mock Ranches Group, and in each episode, we sit down with the people who are shaping the future of Texas. We're not afraid to ask the hard questions. This is the Landowner Insider Podcast, presented by the Mock Ranches Group.
Dr. Lansford, thanks for coming. A hot topic today is the New World Screwworm.
Yes, sir.
Before we get into that, I think the reason to have the discussion is, as ranchers, as landowners, as cattlemen, as wildlife managers, our livelihoods in a lot of ways depend on the health of the animals that we steward.
Absolutely.
And so there's all kinds of things that threaten that, parasites and disease and different things. And that's what we'll discuss today. But I so much appreciate you carving the time to come out and discuss this imminent issue of the screwworms and how we can be prepared for it, raise awareness for it. So,
absolutely.
I appreciate you coming.
No, thank you for the opportunity. It's something that we've been working on since March of 2024 to start thinking about and increasing awareness. And certainly after it hit Mexico in November of 24, it's been a major push from our agency is to get out and with our other partners to get out and really increase the awareness and knowledge related to screwworms.
Yes, sir. All right, I'm going to read this.
Okay.
Thomas T.R. Lansford III, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Lansford earned a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from Texas A&M University. Taylor, this is our third Aggie in a row. We're batting 1,000 here today. You can't whoop.
Yeah.
Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from Texas A&M University. Been involved in regular veterinary medicine most of his career. He has served the state of Texas, gaining regulatory, public health, and veterinary medicine expertise through the Department of State Health Services, Meat Safety Assurance Section, and as state director for the Texas Animal Health Commission, as a region director and assistant executive director, as a foreign animal disease diagnostician, an emergency management and industry liaison for over 24 years. Dr. Lansford returned to the Texas Animal Health Commission in early 2024 to serve as the Assistant State Veterinarian and Deputy Executive Director for the agency. Dr. Lansford is a South Texas native. He and his wife, Christy, a Texas A&M AgriLife Extension agent, enjoy spending time with their two sons, Buddy and Byron.
Yes, sir.
Well, I appreciate you coming and spending some time with us. Screwworm. Let's talk about it. What is it?
All right. Well, so I think everybody is familiar with maggots, right? Everybody's seen maggots in deceased animals or in trash and things like that. And so those maggots are one of the life stages of a class of flies known as blowflies. So screwworms are scientifically known as a Cochleomya hominivorax.
Okay.
And the reason that they're so interesting in terms of impact is they consume live flesh. And so
That's what makes them unique.
That is correct, yeah. So the others all eat, decaying organic material of some kind. Screwworms actually feed on live tissue.
I'd only heard of them from the old timers. when I was a kid, my parents were not really in agriculture. We dabbled in it. A lot of stock show stuff, real involved in stock shows. But when I was a kid, I wanted to go day work with a few guys all the time. It's all I wanted to do. So I heard stories back then of when they would doctor screwworms, and they'd rope them and tie them down and have a can a lot of times, and you'd pop them out, pop those larvae out. Boots O'Neill up at the Sixes. Boots has been a recent podcast celebrity on a lot of shows.
You bet.
And Boots will tell stories about doctoring screwworms. So for a lot of us, that's the only exposure that we've had, especially like in my generation. Last time they were here was the 60s.
Correct. Well,
60s?
Yeah. So they were eradicated in 66, but because of their presence in Mexico, Texas got to enjoy, as some of the other Southwest did too, incursions of New World screwworms through the 70s and even into the first part of the 80s.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, my father-in-law told me, he was at our house night before last. I let him know that you were coming. And he told me he actually had to doctor some when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. Just very vaguely remembers it. And I think he's 70. Right. So when he's a kid, more than 60 years ago, he remembered doctoring a few of them and some sheep and in cattle both.
Right.
And that would have been in Lampasas County, I think.
Right. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. New World screwworm. What's the... Let's just pretend that people don't know much, because I think the more information we can give them, the better it helps them sort through the propaganda and sorts through the noise and help, better analyze when this does show up, if it's going to show up, how to look for it. So let's just be real basic with them. Why is it so dangerous compared to a normal fly? Let's start there.
Okay, absolutely. So the reason that we're so worried about screwworms is because not only because of the damage that it causes to the animals, it's the economic impact that it causes. And so that economic impact comes in the forms of things like death loss. Certainly, with this being a highly treatable condition, regardless of any time you have something that stresses an animal, right, you're going to get decreased performance and decreased productivity. So you have economic losses associated with production losses. Mm-hmm. You also get decreased market value because, my example I always like to give is, what if that New World screwworm infestation is in the top of a fat steer? Well, what's right under the skin in the top of a fat steer?
Ooh, a steak.
Yeah, the ribeye, right? And so even if that animal is treated and it overcomes that infestation and any other issues with that wound, you've now got scar tissue and you've got decreased value. So it's market loss, right? Mm-hmm. And so marketability loss there. The other thing that makes it significant in terms of economic impact, of course, is the increased labor and increased management costs that go with this, especially related to labor, to look at the animals, to do more frequent inspections. As a cattle owner, I know that I have gotten away from, nowhere near daily inspection of cattle and looking at my own herd. But that's something that we're going to have to go back to if we have New World screwworms. The other part of that is, as you mentioned, Mr. O'Neill there, how long ago was that we had screwworms, and how many cowboys and good horses were there? And you can go in South Texas where I live and have the same conversation with anybody of that era, and they'll tell you the same thing: is we don't have enough cowboys and we don't have enough good horses to deal with screwworms again.
There's probably a lot of guys driving down Washington Street here in Stephenville that are inside secretly hoping that this deal materializes because they get to go doctor cattle.
Yeah, I think they should. I know a lot of those and have some family that think that's a good idea, but I'll tell you that I think they should talk to some of those old cowboys and find out that that's a 7-day-a-week, nonstop opportunity to go doctor cattle when we have screwworms. Yeah.
What's the terminal rate on it?
So the terminal rate just depends on the ability to get those animals up and treat. And so that's a great question, and one that's been looked at. Probably the most historically accurate number I've heard is a number of places that were in screwworm areas kind of factored in somewhere around a 7% death loss. And so
that's in a herd that can be managed.
Right.
Yeah. That's not wild sheep in the Trans-Pecos.
Right.
That's not nilgai herds in South Texas, all dad in West Texas, whitetail deer. That's in domestic livestock that can be managed.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a couple things though to think about with that. In a couple important points. One is as much worry as we have related to screwworms and much concern we have. I think it's important for everybody to remember that we're not talking about a cloud of locusts that are going to descend upon us, right? And so it takes time for a screwworm population to establish in an environment, and even when they do, you're not talking about flies like we think about horn flies and heel flies, right? Yeah. And we need to touch on the difference between those flies a little bit, and we'll get to that. But so one, we have to think about what is that attack rate on those animals, right? And that's going to be dependent on the number of screwworm adult females, really, that are in the environment. The other part of that is we have to think about what kind of environment are those animals in, right? Is there opportunities for natural wounds? When you start thinking about livestock, are there opportunities and ways we can have those animals up where we can do better inspections and have ways to treat them? You know, back in the day, there's lots of stories in South Texas where they treated calves by tying them when they were newborns, tying them to a mesquite tree so they come back and treat them 2 or 3 days. Hopefully we don't get to that, but that's something to keep in mind that may be a real option for some operations. So we have to think about that attack rate and what that environment looks like and our ability to manage, find wounds and treat those wounds. So to touch on the fly piece, I think all of us are I'm 50 years old, so I was born in 1975. I was a baby when we had screwworms in South Texas, and I don't remember it at all. But we think about the impact that has on when we start thinking about flies and where they are. Everybody is familiar with, at this day and age, from just a couple of generations of this being eradicated, with horn flies and heel flies, seeing lots of flies on the animals because that's where they live. Yeah. That's a big difference between the screwworm fly and the other flies we deal with. Is most of the adult life on, or nearly, with the exception of when they're laying eggs, the adult life of the screwworm flies spent out in the environment on plants, not on the animals.
Oh, really?
So that's an important thing to keep in mind, because when we start thinking about how do we deal with an infestation of screwworms, we're not going to be able to treat those animals like we do for heel flies and horn flies. That's also the reason that the other products that have great products that are out there that will control horn flies and heel flies, the IGR products, insect growth regulators that pass through the animal and go into the feces.
Feed through
product.
Fly products. Go down to Cooper's feed store down there and get some feed through. Absolutely. Or go to Tractor Supply, whatever.
That's the reason that they won't work though for screwworms, is because the larval stage or the maggot stage of the screwworm fly is in the animal. The larval stage or the maggot stage of those other flies is on the ground in the fecal pat. So that's why those products are not going to be effective specifically for screwworms. Now, to kind of jump ahead maybe on a few things, one of the things that it will be critical to do from a management standpoint is manage all of those other ectoparasites. And so that includes horn flies and heel flies, ticks, anything that can cause a break in the skin or cause an irritation where the animal rubs and then causes a break in the skin will set up a situation that's ripe for screwworm infestation.
How quick?
So
depends on where the fly is.
Yeah, it depends on how many flies there are and how far they are away. But stories from producers in South America that they live with this pest, they say that if there's flies in the vicinity that within a minute or less, if you make a cut on an animal, like when you're doing a castration, the flies will show up.
Quick. Yeah, really quick. Seems like the fly-borne illnesses in animals to me, it seems like become more prevalent. Like we had a pretty big outbreak here in Erath County of pigeon fever last year. Man, I've never dealt with pigeon fever. You hear about it.
Right.
Hadn't dealt with it ever. And I had 3 horses in our barn get pigeon fever last year, and these horses are getting fly sprayed every day. Well, they had little summer sores right on their chest right here where your front cinch would be. And those horses, they'll kick at that with their back feet, keep that just enough irritated. And some of them, I don't know if they ever had as much as a summer sores, they get a little calic right there. And where if you're caping a deer, you'd come together right there. That's right. And those flies get on that and lay a larva. And somehow that manifests out the chest of those horses with abscesses out their chest. Nastiest thing I've ever dealt with.
Yes, sir.
And then we had EHV last year. I'm sure you worked on that.
We were in the middle of that. Yes, sir.
In the middle of EHV. And then I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I was up in Utah riding horses with a bunch of guys, and we had a horse come down with the VS, vesicular stomatitis. I never heard of that. We'd quarantine horses for 6 weeks in Oklahoma. Couldn't bring them back into Texas. So maybe it's just me, but it seems like some of that stuff's becoming more prevalent.
Well, I don't know that it's becoming more prevalent. My experience with many of these ectoparasite related diseases is they kind of go in cycles. We'll kind of take screwworms off the table for that. But you think about vesicular stomatitis, and there's some question about exactly how that virus is moved within the insect population in the environment.
Kind of manifests like a herpes virus.
Right. And but it's cyclical, it kind of comes and goes, and there's worse years than others. Same with cattle fever ticks. We kind of see a cycle on those as well. Certainly weather patterns play a lot into that, when we have these prolonged periods of warmer than normal winters and things like that certainly impact the
pigeon fever, that was a big deal.
Right.
The conditions have to just be right. I think similar like an anthrax or something. Spores are in the ground, conditions are right. You get a pop. Yes, sir. Yeah. So how much of a role does just basic animal husbandry, basic parasite control, is that going to help the average consumer? Guy that's got 3 roping horses and a pen of roping steers here in Stephenville?
Yes, no, absolutely. So to answer that, I want to step back to about the 30,000 foot view and talk about where we are with screwworms and what we need to do. So one of the basic biologies pieces associated with the screwworm fly is the female fly only mates once. And so that's why the sterile fly technique works. And so
what's the lifespan of the fly?
Yeah, so the lifespan of the fly is somewhere around 18 to 24 24 under usual circumstances.
Okay.
Now it can be longer if it's cooler in the pupal stage or the cocoon stage that goes in the ground. If it's cooler there, then the life cycle can be longer because they'll wait for it to warm up.
Is that from larva to dead fly, or is that from hatched fly to dead fly?
That's hatched to dead fly.
Okay.
And so to kind of talk about that life cycle real quick. So it starts when you have a female fly that lays eggs on the edge of a wound or on a damaged mucous membrane. It's not just wounds. And then within 12
damaged
hours.
Mucous membrane, open umbilical cord on a new calf.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So
or irritated anus on something.
Right. Yeah. Cows at calve that have, in that process get enough tissue damage on the back end of the reproductive tract to cause infestation. Damages in a prepuce on a bull or a horse, same thing. They'll get in there and infest that. So, but within 12 hours or so, those eggs are going to hatch and they'll go to the first stage of the larvae, and that's very small. But they're usually in that stage in the animal in the larval stage from 5 to 7 days, depending on some things there. And at that point, the maggot falls out and falls to the ground.
Okay.
And then buries itself and sits in there for another 5 to 7 days unless there's cooler temperatures. And at that point, the pupal stage or the cocoon stage can withstand some things and kind of hang out till conditions get better. And at that point, the screwworm fly emerges, the adult fly emerges and starts that over, and they're usually in an environment somewhere around 14 days, 10 to 14 days.
Got it. How's that compare to the heel fly or the horn fly?
To be honest, I'd have to go look that up. It's similar. I don't think it's too far different, but don't hold me to that. I'd have to go back and look for sure. Yeah.
I'm just thinking here, Erath County, there's a lot of flies. There's a bunch of dairies and a bunch of agriculture, similar to what you would get in the panhandle up around the dairies and the feed yards. But we've got a lot of flies here that a lot of people don't contend with in other parts of the state. Most of our listeners probably won't think of a bad fly problem until you walk out on your back porch in Stephenville and there's a million flies underneath your back porch, and where did these come from?
Right. Yeah.
And they just seem to show up overnight. You don't know why they got there, how they came, what caused the big. Today I have no flies in my place, and tomorrow I could have a million of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. There's a good entomologist that works for AgriLife right up the street here.
Right up the street.
Dr. Sonia Swiger.
Station. I better go
a good one to talk to her. Yeah.
I better go talk to him. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep. What can we do to monitor for it, look for it? We'll start there, and what I want to end up is the status of where the fly is at currently. But let's just stay on the landowner side. Looking for the fly, what's good animal care and parasite control look like?
Sure. So and yes, and I apologize. I didn't answer all of the other questions, but it's okay.
No, totally
it all
okay.
ties together. Yep. So I got sidetracked on the treatment or the life cycle and things like that. So what we need to think about in terms of management, and so we think about, response to animal disease and biosecurity and all of those things. And really with an ectoparasite, what you're looking for is enhanced management practices. And so that includes, doing anything and everything we can to control or to disrupt that screwworm life cycle. Okay. And so when we start thinking about response to an incursion, there's the first phase, which is going to be controlling the population, the environment, while we're waiting on enough sterile flies to hit the second phase, which is re-eradication. So anything we do and can do with an animal from a management standpoint to decrease the opportunity for infestation or find infestation early and get rid of the maggots is critical to controlling that fly population in the environment. So with all that said, certainly up in our game on integrated pest management in terms of making sure we're controlling biting flies, making sure we're controlling ticks. Again, anything that can cause an animal, lice, same thing. Any of those ectoparasites that are going to cause them to have a sore that can be infested. In terms of...
So you're talking about fly sprays.
Yeah, so fly sprays, use of tags, insecticide tags, appropriate tags. Use of even pour-on products, all of those things, right? We need to think through what that looks like to make sure we're decreasing the opportunity. So, but all of that aside, I had the opportunity, and it's a good friend of mine that works in the pharmaceutical industry. He said, the most important thing we can put on an animal for screwworms is eyes. And he's absolutely right. It's monitoring those animals, inspecting those animals very frequently, even daily if possible, to look for any kind of wound. And so the goal there is to find any kind of wound or infestation on a damaged mucous membrane, to treat it before it gets infested, or to treat it at early infestation and then treat the wound to prevent other infestation from following along. Again, anything to disrupt that life cycle. So other things to think about outside of that, and certainly in terms of things that producers should be thinking about.
So you treat that wound with like a medicated cream, Furazin?
Yeah, so that, talk to, you work with your veterinarian or whatever y'all have worked out on your individual place for wound management. A lot of times that's, fortunately now we've, an FDA has done some conditional approvals and emergency use authorizations on some products for at least for cattle and dogs and cats at this point, that can be used for treating infestations, but also for prevention. And so incorporating those into any time that there's a wound, but two, especially if we induce a wound. So think about common production practices like castration, branding, ear tagging, dehorning, all of those things, tail docking in sheep, the whole gambit there. That will be a really important part of the management approach on that, is to include one of those products that will do some prevention as well. So until that wound heals up.
So should I run down and stock up on even more ivermectin that I've already got?
So that's a
we should have all bought stock in ivermectin a few years ago.
Absolutely right. So that's a really common question and a good question. I think what we need to all be thinking about is educating ourselves and being aware and minding, paying attention to where the fly is. And so to kind of get to that question, where the fly is in Mexico right now is the most recent case is about 183 miles south of Texas in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. It's in a 3-year-old bovine. There's been 33 cases in Tamaulipas since the end of December. And so not that many. Not that many, but what it sure tells us is that it's now on the list of the 19 states in Mexico that have had screwworms. It's one of the 17 No, let me rephrase that. It's one of the 13 that definitely has a fly population established. That's what that number of infestations tells us. So some of the early cases that got close to the United States, like the one in Nuevo Leon back in September that was about 70 miles from Laredo, and then those that were another, about 40, 50 miles south of there, were tied to movements. And so those were stamped out through the use of sterile flies and inspections and all of those things, right, and treatments. But that hasn't happened in Tamaulipas, unfortunately. And so that number of cases, and I think we've had 6 new cases within the last few days, that tells us there's an active fly population there. So
are they pouring sterile flies right there?
Yeah, so there's been a change at the end of January with the number of cases that had popped up in the month of January in Tamaulipas. USDA changed their approach on sterile fly dispersal. And so what they had been doing was kind of getting just ahead of where the cases were and trying to drop sterile flies right there with the most recent infestation and ahead of it to kind of stop it. Now what they've done is they've moved quite a bit north of that. They're still dropping flies right there in the bottom of Tamaulipas too, but they have extended that dispersal polygon, that area where they're dropping sterile flies, much further north, even into within or inside 50 miles into Texas now.
I was about to ask you that. I saw a map last week that looked like a bunch of the border counties were getting flies.
So they're dropping flies in those counties in South Texas. And the question, then become
how far? Not as far as El Paso.
No. Just from the kind of the southern end of Webb County, kind of wherever Tamaulipas touches Texas. And so maybe not all the way up to the northern edge of Tamaulipas, but along that southern part of the river and then back across anything that falls within that 50 miles. That kind of scoop there across
Carrizo
the bottom
south.
of Texas. It's actually south of Laredo south.
More Laredo south.
Yeah. More into Zapata County is kind of the northern edge, and then kind of across and then down.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but the question is become, well, why is USDA doing that? Isn't that a waste of sterile flies to not be dropping them in the hot spots? Well, they are still dropping in a hot spot, but the goal now is to create a very large buffer zone between known infestation in the United States. And so that's why that shift has occurred, and it's really critical that we have that much of a barrier there to try to hold it at bay in Mexico. So
how confident is the United States government, the Texas government, in the Mexican government's control of it?
So that's another
transparency control.
Yeah, that's another really common question. So, of course, Dr. Dinges, the state vet, and I go to a lot of meetings and have the opportunity to visit with lots of folks within USDA. We have the opportunity to meet with the Screwworm Directorate very frequently, thanks to some of our industry friends here in Texas. But one of the things that's happened in Mexico over the course of time since November of 24 is USDA has gotten in there and worked with Mexico to develop a screwworm action plan. Now, we haven't seen the plan, but reports from Mexico and boots on the ground, and USDA sends people down there to do audits in these states, Mexican states. They're improving their response and the efficiency of their response. So
that's good.
So that's a good thing, right? But the other part of that is one of the biggest challenges, in my opinion anyway, that Mexico has faced, and certainly is why the screwworm has moved up through Central America and Mexico so quickly, is they haven't been able to control the animal movement adequately. And that's why the fly is moving. The fly is not moving naturally that fast. It's moving on trucks and trailers.
Yeah.
And so
there's a lot of wild cattle down there too.
But, I mean, there's lots of.
But wild cattle don't move hundreds of miles.
Right. And so, we can talk about all kinds of political theories and all kinds of things associated with unrest and illicit activities and, all the things going on in Mexico and illegal movements of livestock certainly play a role in that movement of that pest through Mexico. But I think, to kind of get to maybe what you're really headed towards there is, do we think it's going to get here? And, our opinion is, and we pray that we're wrong, but at some point we will deal with an infestation in South Texas somewhere. So
how fast do you estimate once it gets to South Texas? How fast do you estimate that it spreads then?
So that's
it may be a good thing that cattle numbers are down.
Right. That's $1 million question. So some things to think about there are let's think about what the animal population in the environment is now, right? And so I didn't touch on the dollar amounts associated with this, but we think about, if nothing else, the white-tailed deer population. So back prior to screwworm eradication, there were, depending on who you ask, 150, 200,000 to 500,000 deer in the whole state of Texas. Now we've got 5.3 million.
Yeah.
And then you throw in the feral swine.
Deer population down there in
Right.
that part of the state of a deer to 7 acres. What's the average? You think
Some of it's higher than that.
Yeah, especially on the high fence places, it's a lot higher than that.
Yeah.
Probably in the low fence, you're somewhere close to that. I imagine.
That's probably, yeah.
But then you didn't have nilgai either.
Right. And so
if it
that's
comes
the other
into
part.
the valley, and those nilgai will move long distances.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Where the cattle will stay behind fence, the nilgai will move long distances.
Absolutely. So
yeah, you get in the Trans-Pecos. If it gets in the Trans-Pecos, you've got aoudad sheep that move a long ways.
Long way, yes.
Yeah.
So the number of animal hosts in the environment certainly will impact or have an effect on how fast it may spread, right? The one of the more important things about monitoring animals, or most critical things about monitoring animals, is not just looking at them and treating anything that you think is suspicious, but is reporting anything that's suspicious, especially right now, right? Because our from a response standpoint, our goal or our objective is to throw everything we've got at it. And so one of the things that's another important thing for folks to understand is that if we have a screwworm incursion into the United States, we will get sterile flies. And so, with the sterile fly dispersal center that opened up a couple of weeks ago at Moorefield in Texas, in South Texas, there, we have the capacity to receive those sterilized pupa and get them grown up there to be able to be distributed or dispersed either off the ground or from the air, either one. So, but where I'm going with all of that is it's really going to be critical for early detection and early reporting so that we can throw everything we've got at it, because our hope is that we'll get an incursion, find it early, and be able to stamp it out.
Yeah.
And then we just wait until the next one comes, because that's certainly historically, if you look at what the situation was in the 70s here in Texas and then, like I said, Southwest, you look at 1972, the screwworm infestations went plumb up into Oklahoma and past. So a lot of that had to do with the fact that, yes, it was eradicated from the United States, but it was not eradicated from Mexico. So we had these incursions from
continual
Mexico.
long-term incursions.
Yeah. And that's the last thing I would say about that. And I always, when I'm doing presentations with folks, as a summary, remind them that, this state of awareness and heightened risk that we have now is the new norm. It's not going to go away soon in Mexico. We're looking at least a decade before this gets resolved. And so we need to be thinking about this long term and what that means and how to keep our vigilance up. Yeah.
So not to scare anybody, but economically, what should somebody look like there? Is it you just increase your budget for help and husbandry and treatment? And is there a real concern? Do you think there is a real concern for wildlife herds, exotic herds down there in that region of Texas?
Yes, absolutely. And then that's unfortunate, but we don't have very many tools to work with those populations of animals, especially the ones that are out on the range. Now there's some things that can be done with the licensed veterinarian through extra label use and some things like that with the captive herds where they can get their hands on them and
of
treat
exotics
them.
especially.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially the high dollar.
Yeah. Labeled as far as you can discuss, labeled, you can't do anything with white-tailed deer.
Right.
Right.
But
nothing is labeled for white-tailed deer.
Yeah.
For exotics, you can get some things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you just...
And I'm sure
you have to
Parks and
work
Wildlife
through-
will stay on top of the bighorn sheep. They got too much invested out there.
No, absolutely. And so, all of that just needs to be worked through with your veterinarian, because none of those products are going to be labeled for any of those species, but they're all considered minor species, right? And so they fall under some exemptions or some exceptions under the law for veterinarians to be able to treat some of those animals with some products. So all that said, certainly that will have an impact. I think that historically speaking, again, talking to folks that, in South Texas, you hear reports that probably 80 to 90+% of the fawn crop succumb to screwworm infestation every year. And so that's why the white-tailed deer numbers were so low.
Wow.
Is because there was no fawn crop. And so you start thinking about what that looks like for our hunting economy. And I was going to mention that, there's a table of numbers that certainly Animal Health Commission has presented. They show up in a number of other publications with AgriLife and USDA, where their 1976 economic impact numbers were adjusted to the 2024 dollar, and just kind of reflected just the impact on sheep and goats at that point. And so that was somewhere around $700 million a year for the livestock production side, and overall economic impact, general economic impact to the economy in Texas would be about $1.8 billion in 2024 dollars.
Yeah.
But what that doesn't account for is how much more livestock we have in Texas now versus what we had in the 70s. It doesn't account for the prices, the market
prices,
value of these animals now, and it doesn't account for any of the hunting industry. So between the white-tailed deer and the exotics, you've got almost a $12 billion annual hunting economy in the state of Texas, and none of that's captured in those numbers that were extrapolated. So yeah, unfortunately, there will be some impacts on that population. Again, though, if we can find the infestation early and get on top of it before it can spread widespread into the wild population of animals, then we have a chance of not having it spread, and all of that mitigates or decreases the impact from infestation of screwworms.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many people are cautious of notifying the government,
Absolutely.
Maybe rightfully so in some cases, but I hope here they will lean in.
Yeah. So
here they will lean in.
And that's been a common, discussion point too among producer groups and all of those pieces. I want to thank our industry partners, livestock industry partners, and our wildlife folks for really pushing that. If you see something, you need to call somebody and tell them, and don't be afraid of the quarantine. Nobody wants to be the first one. I use it on my own self though. If I see something in the cattle at home, man, I'm gonna report it, because you know what? If I report first, I'm guaranteed to get sterile flies.
Yeah.
And so, again, the sterile fly commodity is very precious. With the infestations where they are, or the number of flies and the amount of infestation we have in Mexico and Central America now, probably going to need somewhere between 400 and 500 million flies. I've heard some numbers more recently that suggest, maybe more than 500 million flies a week to accomplish eradication. Our current production capacity is out of that one plant in Panama at 110 million flies per week. So we've got a big deficit there. So Mexico is supposed to have the converted fruit fly facility. They're converting a fruit fly facility to a sterile screwworm facility, open in June or July, and then up to capacity to produce 100 million by the end of this year.
Okay.
So that's good. That will go a long way in helping create the buffers and hopefully holding it, right? Then
there were some production facilities in the States.
Yes, there were. And so there were a number of small ones historically in Texas. I think maybe 5 of them. I don't remember exactly how many. But ultimately what happened there is the last big one was the one at Mission at Moore Field, and that it produced a couple of 100 million flies a week. And so that's also going to be the site now of the new production facility. The old production facility, when it quit operating, unfortunately it burned down. And so what they are working on at Moore Field in terms of a production facility is going to be a brand new construction from the ground up.
How long is that going to take to come on?
So USDA when we were down there a couple of weeks ago at the opening of the dispersal center, Secretary Rollins and USDA staff continue to reiterate that they are on track for that facility to be open within 18 months. And so that'll put us, sometime probably fall of 2027. And then within a couple of years, so sometime in 2028, to be up to the goal of producing 300 million sterile flies per week there.
Got it.
So And so that'll get us our 500 that we need, and then if there's other things going on, some other technologies that may play into that, where instead of producing, to keep in mind that when I say we're producing 110 million sterile flies per week now, that means there's 55 million females and 55 million males, right? And we need to fit the males. The female, sterilized female is completely harmless and completely useless in terms of turning it out. It's just a fly.
We don't have genetic technology to just make males these days.
And the technology's there. It's just they've got to get the approvals, because then you're talking about genetically modified organisms. And there's some things that they need to work through there, and some ways to make that more efficient. And that's being worked on right now. Absolutely.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So we can incorporate those technologies, and essentially we've doubled our sterile fly.
Same number of flies, just all of them making an impact.
All of males, right?
Yeah, all of them earning their keep.
Right. That's it. Yes, sir. Yep.
What's the real risk to humans?
Yeah, so the human piece of it, certainly this is a non-discriminate or warm-blooded animal parasite, and so certainly will infest humans. I think if you look at what's going on in Central America, this is becoming a fairly significant public health issue. There's been 151 cases in Mexico as well, and some deaths associated with screwworm infestation. The thing to keep in mind there, though, is we have to think about what the exposure rate is, right? And so in the United States, there may be some concern with there's a larger maybe homeless population, to think about, and exposure in the environment is certainly outside. Right. So some of those things will factor in. The other side of that, though, is our availability of folks to treat and deal with that is probably greater. The access is greater, right? And so certainly can be a human health issue, a public health issue, but until it gets here and we see what happens, from our perspective at the animal health side, it's certainly of concern, but it's not something for people to be panicked about. So the other thing I think that's important to keep in mind on the public health side, though, is we are so tuned in at this point in time in our society to think about infectious disease, right? So you have somebody that's sick, or an animal that's sick that's in a group. Now everybody is exposed and can become sick. When we start talking about ectoparasites and things like screwworms, it's not an exposure to other animals that are infested that's the problem. It's being in the environment where the ectoparasite is. And so you can have one cow in a pasture of 100 cows that's infested and nothing else is, and those other cows aren't going to get infested from the infested cow. Now, if one of those other cows gets a wound, then because the fly is in the environment, she'll become infested. So that's an important thing for us to think about in terms of why treatments and movement controls will be so critical and part of the response. And it's an important concept for people to understand too. And certainly I encourage our livestock producers to understand that concept because, we've heard some things on the public health side that, maybe there's concern that exposure to animals increases your risk to infestation with New World screwworms. And that's not necessarily true.
I wouldn't see that being the case.
Yeah, it's being in the environment where the adult fly is, the adult female fly is what increases your chance of getting infested. And then you get a wound, and then you're as subject to anything else. Yeah. So, right.
Taylor, if you're going camping and you've got a big cut on your leg and there's flies around, you should put a Band-Aid on your leg before you take your nap after you eat your PB&J.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
I'd hate for you to get a screwworm in your calf.
Yeah.
It would be awkward.
It would be awkward. Yeah.
It'd be real awkward.
Yeah. So especially considering one of the primary clinical signs associated with screwworms is the smell.
Oh gosh, that would be awkward.
Yeah, it'd get really awkward.
We'd have to put Taylor in that other office.
There you go.
There.
Yep.
So I'm gonna get to the real estate side of it a little bit, because obviously we're ranch brokers is what we do. So my goal here is to educate landowners, inform landowners, give them just an open conversation, different than a press release.
Sure.
Sid Miller gets up there and does a press release. They hear a short version. This is a little longer form, so I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely.
for us too, though, as a fiduciary advising buyers and sellers around the state of Texas. And we do have a management side of our company too. I own a business called Texas Land and Wildlife. So we manage wildlife properties. Okay. We manage ag properties. We run equipment. We do different things there. We've got a very heavy fiduciary responsibility. And so you mentioned quarantine earlier.
Right.
Is that a herd quarantine or a property quarantine?
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by the Mock Ranches Real Estate Group. At Mock Ranches, we specialize in representing buyers and sellers of farms, ranches, and recreational land across the state of Texas. Our team sold over $1.25 billion of Texas land, and we focus on helping landowners make smart decisions about their most valuable assets. If you're thinking about buying or selling, or simply want to understand the land markets better, get a hold of us at mockranches.com. Mock Ranches, Texas land represented right.
So from a response standpoint, let me preface all of all of this with, unfortunately, but fortunately in this case, we have been dealing with an ectoparasite in Texas for over 100 years, and that's the cattle fever tick.
Yes, sir.
So our statutes and our rules are all in place for screwworms, just like they are with cattle fever ticks, that if we have an infestation that's confirmed in Texas, we will put in a quarantine area, just like we do for fever ticks. Now, it won't be
anthrax, fever ticks, any of it.
So it'll be that area. It won't be
CWD. There's quarantine areas.
Right. It won't be premise by premise. It'll be an area. And so we're going to follow the kind of the lead that's in the USDA New World Screwworm playbook in terms of what size that is. We'll look at starting with an infested zone that's going to be about 20 kilometers across. So, diameter there. It won't be a strict circle. We'll use landmarks that everybody understands as to, what's the infested zone and what's not. But everything in there will be at that point essentially under an area quarantine. Now, you may not have an individual piece of paper for your ranch that says I am quarantined, but you will have, you'll know that you're in that quarantine area. And we'll accomplish that because within that infested zone, our response, just like for fever ticks, is to get out and make contact with all the landowners and explain, okay, here's the requirements. And it's an important concept for everybody to understand that just because you're in an infested zone and you're under quarantine doesn't mean that you can't move animals anymore. We are very much so committed to the continuity of business. And to accomplish that, though, just like with fever ticks, you'll need to have an inspection and a treatment that's appropriate to the class of animals and what type of movement it is. They'll need to be identified, and they'll need a movement permit. And so,
is that to move live animals, carcasses, all the above?
So it's going to be primarily related to the live animal because that's another little piece of the biology associated with screwworms. Is certainly if somebody were to have an animal that, and hunting is a prime example of this, right? If you take a deer that's infested and immediately enclose it in some kind of bag or container where the maggots can't get away from it, then you can move the maggots that way. The biology of the fly, though, in the screwworm is that once that animal dies, it's not long and those maggots will start coming out. Now, it's important from the example with taking a deer, or if you find an animal that just died, to be prepared to kill those maggots, right? And so need to have whatever, a permethrin or a bag to cut out a wound and put the maggots inside it, or the ability to get them on the ground and squash them, whatever you got to do to kill the maggots. It's important, again, to disrupt that life cycle and be prepared. So
permethrin, like Piranha or something, will kill them?
Yeah, so
yellow spray, get at the feed store.
So there's a couple of approved ones. And so when you need to look for the ones that say New World Screwworm on them, there's a couple of permethrin products that are approved. There's some others that are probably in the works to get some exceptions to be approved. It's the same concentration, just with applicator laws. If it doesn't say the pest on the label, it's not actually legal to use it. So there are a couple of approved permethrin products out there. You can get them. I've seen them at TSC and Atwoods, and local feed stores. Wherever they sell those types of products, generally there's some of that sitting in there. So that's a good product to have to use for that. You can gather that up. You can trim it out and put it in a bag and stick it in the freezer for a prolonged period of time, that'll kill them. If it's a whole animal that you've come across that's recently died, one of the more effective ways to kill those and make sure they don't fall out and get in the ground is to burn the animal. And so that's a good way to kill maggots as well. So,
okay.
Yep.
Okay. So if I've got a load of cattle at the ranch and I'm in a quarantine area and I want to haul those cattle to Ken Jordan's and sell them.
Yes, sir.
Does an inspector come to the ranch and inspect them before I put them on the trailer and haul them?
Yeah.
Or does an inspector meet me at the sale barn?
So we'll need to,
Probably both.
The goal is, well, there will be an increased awareness, right? And certainly people looking at the sale barn, but the goal is to deal with the infestation at the premises. And so we will come, it'll be either be us or a veterinarian that will come out and inspect those animals and make sure that if, depending on the class of animal, if there's a treatment that needs to be given, so what we're thinking about is the protocol model after the protocol that Mexico uses to move animals is there's an inspection, they get in a treatment with ivermectin. There's some other products now that we've got that have been approved by FDA, but a treatment with one of those products, the animals are going to have to be held long enough for that product to become effective. So that may be, 48 to 72 hours depending on the treatment. But at that point, then those animals are ready to move. Okay. And so again, that's going to require some additional management and working through how that works with each individual producer. But it's not a you can't ever move anything again. It's just there's going to have to be some extra steps.
What about rodeo horses, performance horses, livestock show, 4-H, all these kind of animals?
Yeah. So the good news on those animals as we think about those is the level of inspection they receive every day, right? Because those animals are getting looked at and messed with every day. So the chances of infestation on them are going to be lower because if somebody sees a wound, they're going to get treated, right? Yeah. And so that does reduce the risk associated with those types of animal movements. But nonetheless, we'll have to look at what class of animal is it and where is it going? Is it going to is it a horse that's going somewhere? And right now we don't have any products that are approved with horses other than the permethrins. But is that horse going to be gone for a long time? Is it coming back? So the good news on horses is we don't have to worry about withdrawal periods. You get into these other classes of livestock that are food animals, and then we have to start worrying about withdrawal periods. Yeah. And so we'll have to balance that with inspections. If it's, things like cull cows that are going to go straight to slaughter, then, it wouldn't be appropriate to treat those animals. We'll need to do a good inspection and try to do everything we can to identify anything that's infested so that it gets held back, but then at that point, everything else could be loaded up and go to slaughter. The other side of that is if you got that load of calves, that you're weaned and getting ready to take to the sale barn, those will need to be inspected and most likely receive a treatment because, again, those animals are probably not going straight to slaughter. They're going to be on the landscape for a while. Yeah. So you'll get past the withdrawal periods with those animals. So,
how long do you anticipate that quarantine zone to be in place?
Yeah. So the quarantines, according to the playbook, which is based on the World Animal Health Organization requirements, it's essentially 3 life cycles of time where there's been no infestation found. And so once there's no infestation, it starts the clock, and that's essentially 90 days after the last infestation.
Okay.
And it's very similar to what we do with fever ticks too. You got to go through that period, right? Yeah. to make sure that there's nothing still in the environment. So we'll do that through, of course, ongoing active surveillance in the infested zone with producers, and certainly have a lot of traps out as well, trying to trap any flies to make sure that whatever we do find are sterile flies,
Are they seasonal, Dr. Lansford?
Yeah, to some degree they are. So there's a couple other things about the biology of this fly. This fly is pretty lazy. So if, we talked about the movement in the environment, they don't go very far if there's hosts around to support their ongoing, cycle. The other part of that is they certainly will live in the environment through some extremes of temperature, but they get pretty where they don't mess with stuff. And so that from another management or aspect, that's one of the things that we'll need to think about if we have incursions of screwworms. They're happiest from a temperature standpoint somewhere, and I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget, somewhere in the mid 70s to the upper 80s. They will slow down.
Kind of like us.
Yeah. So, but they'll slow down when it gets really hot. They don't get out as much. They certainly will keep going when it's really hot. And then when you get below down there in the 60s and below that, then the fly itself, they don't do much at all, and they get really slow. In terms of when can you get rid of them in the environment, so the pupal stage is the one that's hard to kill, right? The hardest to kill. The adult fly is not necessarily hard to kill. You just can't find it.
Right.
Yeah, but the pupal stage in the ground
unless you were to broadcast a pesticide all over the landscape, which the challenge with that is it kills, it's indiscriminate.
Everything else.
Kills every other insect and bug that we need.
Right.
Yeah.
So the pupal stage, it will die in the ground once it gets to the ground temperature gets to 45 for 2 or 3 days, and it's going to die. So if we think historically kind of what that looks like, it is definitely seasonal geographically. Because once you, at least historically, get past kind of a line that went from Del Rio to San Antonio down towards Victoria, south of there, the fly would overwinter because our ground temperatures don't get low enough.
Yeah, the winter garden.
Yeah, exactly. There's, and certainly where I lived the last few winters, it hadn't gotten winter at all. I mean, we had 2 days this year. But anything north of there, typically the ground temperature will get cold enough that they'll go away. And certainly the further north you get, it certainly becomes more seasonal. So they've talked about, well, how far could this go? So if we didn't control movements, it's not impossible for this fly to reach maybe even southern Canada during the summertime and be able to set up shop. But there's going to be winter and it's going to die, right? Yeah. And so my wife's family ranches in Colorado, and we've had a lot of discussions about what that looks like and what the impact's going to be. And I keep telling them, I said, well, in the summer it may be a problem. I hope not. I hope it doesn't get that far. But the other part of that is, you know, come fall, we're going to be done with screwworms up there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You bring up Colorado, and you're hitting on my next question. But before I talk about that, I want to come back to exotics.
Okay.
So, one of the issues in the state is movement of exotics. Movement of white-tailed deer is regulated.
Correct.
Movement of cattle can be somewhat controlled. Exotics kind of fall in this gray area.
Yeah. So
in a quarantine, how do you control movement of exotics?
So our statutory authority actually includes any animal for screwworms.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that includes exotics, and certainly through cattle fever tick quarantine areas, we have dealt with the movement of exotics, and it's the same requirements. They're going to have to be inspected, treated, and identified so that they can leave. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. We've had a Mexico border's been shut down for quite a while. I don't know exactly how long, but quite a while.
Yeah, it opened a couple of days in the end of June there, but not anything since May essentially.
Yes, sir. First question on that: what are we looking at to get the border reopened?
Yeah, so
I'm pivoting on you here, Dr. Lansford.
Absolutely. And so I'll preface all of this with Animal Health Commission. We don't have anything to do with the opening and closing of the borders. But I think through discussion with USDA, I mean, there's a lot of factors involved there, right? And so outside of just the science part of it, and certainly I'm no expert on all of this and not a policy person in DC or for USDA or anybody else. But, I think from my perspective, I think they're looking for is to start seeing that infestation start being pushed back. And so, there's a number of things there that from the Animal Health Commission side that we worry about with the opening of the border, and it's not to say that we don't have faith in what's going on in Mexico. We do have concerns about movement of cattle still from Central America into Mexico, and if you open the border, does that create a vacuum for all of those animals from further south to end up in those states that then puts not necessarily bringing infested animals to the United States, but just moves the infestation that much closer to the United States in a bigger area. And so that's some things to think about there. Secretary
be holding
Rollins
them all
is
right across the border waiting to ship them.
right. Yeah. And so that's our take on the answer that Dr. Dinges and I have been providing. And really that's one of our greatest concerns.
Do you anticipate inspections? You mentioned Colorado. Where's your wife's family there?
So they're outside of Chama, but halfway between Chama, New Mexico and Pagosa Springs.
Oh, it's in the San Juans.
Yes. Yep.
One of my favorite places.
Yep.
Some of our best friends live in Pagosa.
Okay.
Yes, so they like around Chromo, just south.
That's exactly where they are. The ranch is in Chromo, Colorado.
Gosh, what a beautiful,
right off the highway.
What a beautiful.
Yep.
I've driven by there a lot.
Yep.
I've driven by there a lot. Do you anticipate, like if we're hauling horses to Colorado, do you anticipate inspections at the port of entry there, inspections at New Mexico, Oklahoma?
Yeah, I mean, I think
the other states, if Texas gets it and those states don't, do you anticipate they're going to be inspecting as we head north?
Right, and I think the probability of that would be good. I don't know, all that's going to depend on their staffing and confidence in what we're doing. I think an important thing for everybody to understand that in addition to all the preparedness we're doing for Texas, in terms of on the ground in Texas, that is another big part of what Dr. Dinges and I have been working on with other state animal health officials is harmonizing what does it look like? If we have infestation in South Texas, what's it going to look like to move livestock from the rest of the state? What's it going to look like to move livestock from an infested area of the state? And so we've worked with a larger group of state animal health officials to get some plans put together there. And for the most part, everybody agrees. There's a couple of states that are taking a little harder view of some of this than others, and that's to be expected. They have to protect their industries the way that they're being directed to, so that's okay. But one of the other things, though, that we've done is we've worked with what we call the Great Plains Group. And so it's Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. And so those states are kind of the ones where most of the Texas livestock are moving. Now, we can't say that for all of them, but for the most part, that's where the big movements are between states. And so we're all on a pretty good page there. From a response standpoint, probably the most significant thing that's different from that if we have an infestation of New World screwworms from back in the day is there will be movement controls. There will be quarantines, right? And that's because we have to do everything we can to protect the rest of the industry in Texas because we can't afford to have an embargo of Texas livestock. And so we can't move anything out of Texas. One of the biggest differences between now and then also is you look at our production systems. We don't have local and regional livestock production systems anymore. We've got national livestock production systems. And that certainly was illustrated in the high path avian influenza issue with dairy cattle in 2024 and 25. We receive somewhere between 40 and 80,000 head of dairy cattle or move between 40 and 80,000 dairy cattle in and out of the state of Texas every month. And that's a critical component to the dairy production system in the country. Those day-old calves that come to those great big calf ranches in the Panhandle and then the heifers leave as spring and heifers to go back to wherever they came from originally, go into the milk string. And so we have to do everything we can if we have an infestation in South Texas to keep it in South Texas and to assure our trading partners, which will be other states, that, there's no risk with the animals or very limited risk with the animals that they're receiving from Texas. And so to your point about moving horses and things like that, absolutely, I think all of the states that we would be moving stuff to, and I move cattle back and forth between those states and some in New Mexico too. I think all of them there would be some additional requirements on when they get there to make sure that somebody's checking to make sure that if they're coming from an infested zone, that did the treatments work as a protocol, did it all work, and make sure that they're not setting up a situation. So.
Man, the producer keeps getting it on the chin.
Well, and that
Good
is
thing cattle prices are high, right?
And that's an important message, and one that we have not dodged at all, and been very upfront about with all of our producers, especially the cattle industry, is largely this if we have an outbreak, especially a big one, it's going to be borne by a lot of the expense is going to have to be borne by the producers, and that's unless some other parts of the government come up with relief plans and or reimbursement plans and things like that. Which
has there been talk of state funding or national funding to help on the producer level? I understand that they're combating it from a state and national level, but has there been talk of helping on the producers level?
So I know that a lot of the industry groups have broached that topic with the government entities that would do that. And I don't know where they are with those discussions, but I know certainly it has been broached. And so, if you look at what happened with high path influenza in the dairy cattle, and you look at the cattle fever tick program, that there's some relief, mechanisms there. And so certainly the models exist, but again, that's outside of our realm of control. Yeah.
Yes, sir. There was a outbreak of New World screwworms in the Florida Keys, wasn't there a few years ago?
Yeah, back in
the
16.
In those little deer,
yes, sir.
Keys deer, right?
Yeah, and so that was kind of if you're going to get screwworms, that's kind of an ideal way to have to get them.
Okay.
And because that was in an area there's only one way in and one way out, essentially. There are very few other animals there other than those key deer that were significant hosts for the screwworm. And talk about a controlled area. It was surrounded by water. Screwworms don't like to cross water. And so they were very rapidly able to stamp that out with the use of sterile flies.
How long did it take to do that?
So they kind of found that, if memory serves, sometime in the early fall of 2016. And by 2017, they were done with that.
They were done.
Yeah.
Yeah. One breeding season.
Yep.
Pretty much. One breeding season. Got it. What did Texas landowners, what should they be doing today, if anything?
Yeah.
You talked earlier about the flies spend most of their time on a plant, not on an animal host. Is there a certain plant type that we can look at, avoid, brush control treatment?
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud.
Those are great questions. And so one of the things that USDA did do is they announced a $100 million grand challenge for research projects. And that grand challenge actually closed, I believe it was Tuesday of this week, for proposals to be sent in. And I know that was on the list for some of the project, was to actually look at, where in the environment, what plants do those animals, or does a fly hang out on? And is there a way to target, treat maybe some of those areas, or do some things, some habitat control that would reduce that, what am I looking for? Optimal habitat for the screwworm fly. How can we do some things in the environment to maybe decrease that fly population as well? Yeah. So, or inhibit it somehow. So,
otherwise, keep an eye on them.
Yeah.
Keep your trailers cleaned out.
Yeah. So, what can landowners do right now? Certainly in South Texas, we're encouraging everybody to start, if you have livestock, start thinking about, how do I get eyes on those livestock? How do I do surveillance? Same with the wildlife. If you're on a property where you're managing wildlife, or that's what you're doing with that property, is how do you get eyes on wildlife? One of the things to think about in terms of clinical signs associated with this is, especially on a wildlife perspective, is you'll maybe see animals that have a change in behavior, right? They'll certainly withdraw from other groups of animals. Some of them have some neurologic looking signs, and a lot of that has to do with especially the antlered species, in those times of year where the horns are either, the felt's falling off, or the horns are falling off, or starting to grow, all those things, right? And because of those infestations in the head like that, they'll present with almost some neurologic signs. Of course, the hallmark of infestation on an animal is the odor, and you can ask anybody who's ever treated one. That's the same thing they'll tell you without fail, is if you've ever smelled a New World screwworm infestation, you'll never forget it, and you only have to smell one. And so the odor that goes with those infestations is kind of the hallmark. And from a wound perspective, they can, a lot of times, they may be a small wound on the surface of the animal, but there will be quite a bit of drainage associated with it because inside of there will be a large pocket of maggots.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is I've certainly got pictures of pretty significant wounds on animals that are large in appearance as well. So
stick a needle in there and flush it out.
Yeah. So one of the most critical things, if it's an infested wound, is to use something like the permethrin products and squirt down in there. Other things that you can use that will evacuate that wound, include alcohol and things like that. That's kind of tough to be putting straight in there, but certainly the permethrins are probably the gentler way to do that.
Better tie them down tight if you're getting the alcohol.
Right. So, I mean, I'm not certainly recommending that approach, but there are ways to do that. And you think about some of the old remedies that they use to remove those. The important part is treat them and then wash that wound thoroughly to get out anything that died. Because the other thing, we don't get an abscess. You don't get a foreign body abscess on top of an infestation. Now you're dealing with a foreign body abscess. So,
and then another imminent infestation in that abscess.
Right. And so want to clean that out good, get all the maggots out of it, clean the wound well, treat it, if it needs antibiotics or whatever other therapies that you have worked out with your veterinarian to deal with that. And then keep it covered to get it healed up. Same with calves. They say in South America, 100% of calves get infested with New World screwworms unless you treat them. And so down there, and certainly with the approval by FDA for ivermectin as a preventative and Dectomax, we've got some products that we can give those newborn animals to help. You need to treat the umbilicus, treat the navel, get it dried up so it's healing well, give them a shot to keep the infestation prevented. And they say in South America they treat every single cow as well. So
you think in South Texas you'll see guys bringing their heifers up, bringing them cows up, and calving them right around the barn so they can keep an eye on them.
Yeah, so I've talked
That's
about
another component of management.
Absolutely.
Now you're hauling hay and you're feeding cake and you're handling them a lot more.
No, absolutely. And so that's, in my own herd in South Texas, and I've got cattle, 100 miles south of San Antonio down there in the free state of McMullen County. That's a real conversation that my wife and I have had about how are we going to manage through this. We're not set up to have traps to hold these cattle in where we can look at them. Now we have some options on something that's calving. We have some places to bring them up close to the house and monitor and be able to treat and all of those things. So that puts us a little bit ahead of some of the producers that don't have that option. But I think about what we're going to look at in terms of being able to see our cattle, because our lease places, some of those are a couple thousand acre pastures that have got a lot of brush.
Yeah.
And there's no way we're going to see those animals every day. And the other part of it is so how do we manage that? Making sure our cattle are broke to come to feed, and most of them are, because we've got a lot of show stuff. So we got old show heifers and stuff like that. But, we also have a lot of just commercial cows that are Brimmer cows that, you may get them in a pen once to treat them, but it's going to be a while before you get them again, right? Yeah. So they have got long memories. But, we've had to start thinking about the disposition of some of those cattle and how can we handle those, and if we have to handle them repeatedly, how's that going to work? And so those are all management things that we're having to think about, and that would be one of my encouragements with everybody, is to start thinking through from a management standpoint, what are the things that I'm going to have to implement to be able to manage through if I've got an infestation or fall in an infested area for screwworms, what's that going to look like and how do I accomplish that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're a cowboy with a long catch rope, start heading south. If you're a welder that can build good cow pens, there'll be plenty of work.
Yep.
If they can pay you, there'll be job openings.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, your office had sent me several FAQs and fact sheets here. And so what we'll do, Dr. Lansford, is we'll put these on our website. If anybody wants them, they can go to Texas Animal Health Commission's website, tahc.texas.gov. You can pull them up there. There's a New World Screwworm fact sheet. There's an FAQ, and we'll put links to those out for sure. We'll put those in the show notes. We'll do some blogs on this. and we'll put links to those out, and then we'll be sure that when we produce this, because this will get produced video and audio, that we'll tag the Texas Animal Health Commission in it, tag you, and try to point people toward good stewardship. And good awareness of this deal.
Well, if you have the ability to put more than one tag or website in there, I'd recommend a few others.
Okay, let's hear.
Because certainly want to give credit to the work that some of our industry partners have done. There is a Screwworm. I've got it written down here. Screwwormtx.org. And that is the Screwworm Coalition of Texas. It's made up of industry, livestock industry, and wildlife industry groups that have put together a web page that have a lot of current information and a kind of a sounding board to share a lot of information. Certainly want to reach out and recognize our partners at AgriLife Extension. They've got a number of publications out about management and on different species and what that looks like, and recommendations and things for people to be thinking about. So the AgriLife webpage.
Yeah, AgriLife is the research side of most of this.
Right. And the communication, an education piece.
Yeah, because they're programming. I was a county extension agent in 2008, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And, here in Erath County where we live, I was an agent in Hays County. We did not have a research experiment station there. Our closest one, I think, was Uvalde, and there may have been one in Fredericksburg. I don't think there was. I think Uvalde was our closest down there. But there is one here in Stephenville.
Correct.
And so Texas AgriLife Extension, Brian Davis, very good mutual friend of ours. Brian was on the show not long ago, and we discussed the research side of things, but they're programming agency as well.
Correct.
Yeah, so landowner programs is their wheelhouse. There'll be a lot of the education delivery of this, I would think.
Absolutely, and certainly have been great partners in doing the outreach piece and getting information out. And they've developed a lot of information as well to share with different commodity groups. Again, they're working on clearance for a companion animal document, a resource document as well. And so they've got a number of things out. Certainly our web page that you've already mentioned, USDA's web page, they now have a dedicated web page, screwworm.gov, for resources and up to, kind of up to date information about what's going on in Mexico. So
should have bought that domain, Taylor.
I'm telling you, Yeah,
might have been valuable. Dr. Lansford, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for lifetime of service to the landowner.
Now, my pleasure. It's as a landowner, fifth generation of McMullen County, and the roots run deep there in the Free State, and certainly being in South Texas, this is something that I've been very concerned with, and not just touches me professionally, but certainly touches me personally as well. So, very, very much so involved in this and have a stake in the game here.
Well, the next podcast interview that you and I do, we're going to have to discuss your charm, because somehow you talked your wife out of Chromo, Colorado, into McMullen County, Texas, and I've got to learn your tricks.
Yeah, she told me that when we were dating, when we were dating, she said, please don't ever move us to, we actually live outside of Fowlerton. Please don't ever move us to Fowlerton, Texas. And we've been there now for almost 12 years. So
outstanding. Well, I appreciate you so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
I'm going to run buy some fly spray. Bye, everybody.
That wraps us up. I appreciate you listening to The Landowner Insider. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to follow the show, leave us a review, and share it with another Texas landowner. For more insights, listings, and resources for Texas landowners, visit mockranches.com. Till next time, I'm Casey Mock, your host. This has been The Landowner Insider. Go get 'em.